So the following two videos are going to be the answers for the poems that I have already covered and that there are already videos of. I realized that a lot of the poems come with the questions that we were asking our own children that we're teaching at the school where I am currently. And I know that many other children, their teachers might have chosen the same poems. And so I just wanted to make sure that even if it's not the same questions, at least you can see the answer, how we do mark allocation, etc. Okay, so it's going to be two videos covering the poems that I've already done. I have included ticks to show mark allocation, and we will then take it from there. Some of them have essay questions, which I will go through as well. So, The Child Who Was Shot Dead by Soldiers at Nyanga by Ingrid Jonker. There are 6 questions. The first one was to list the places where massacres had taken place or there had been riots. So Langa, Nyanga, Orlando, and Sharpeville. So those are the 4 that you use for the marks each. Talk about the gap between the lines of raises his fists because there's a repetition, and this is showing the gap between the parents. So on one side, you've got the parents and the set of laws that they had to adhere to. And then by the time the children were born and grew up, there was a additional set of laws. So it's showing the difference there. And then there is also the generational gap. So if you read the poem, it seems like the parents don't seem to be doing anything, but the children are now fighting against it, okay? Because obviously as apartheid was implemented, the laws got more stringent and more segregationist, if you want to call it that. So the children growing up in that would have seen differences and they wouldn't have just taken it lying down. Number 3 talks about the title and the contrast of what is going on in the poem. So the title clearly states that the child is dead, and yet the child is not dead is repeated. So this has to do with figurative and literal language. So in a sense, yes, the child is dead physically. However, figuratively, the impact of that death and the repercussion, the ripple effect, the child is now not dead. The story was repeated, it went international, and it seemed to get a life of its own. So that is what's going on there. Number 4, by repeating the word child, the poet is highlighting the atrocity of the deed, the innocence and vulnerability contrasted with the brutal act. 5, the answer is separated. This is for cordoned off. And 6, the last line by itself draws the reader's attention. One more jab at the authorities. You thought you could monitor our movement and restrict us, but the news of what you've done has reached the world without your permission. So that was speaking about the child who had become a giant and moved across the world without a passbook. And that is that one jab. Okay, you tried so hard, and yet this still carried forward. It still went abroad. So those are the 6 questions there with the mark allocation. One of the things that I hope you'll notice is that the answers are full sentences, and in some aspects they seem to be repeating the question that is asked. And the reason for that is it makes it very, very clear and specific what your answer is. So very often students think, oh, hang on a minute, but surely ma'am knows this, or I'm sure sir knows what I mean. The problem is, no, we don't. So you have to state the obvious. Like I say to my students in class, it's like the annoying sibling or niece or nephew who keeps asking why. Oh, why is that there? Because this. Why? Because of that. Why? Because of something else. Okay, you have to finish your train of thought. State the obvious, we don't know what you are thinking. Okay, so essay question. The speaker succeeds in critiquing apartheid and South African history by highlighting one of the more tragic events that occurred during that time by using imagery and repetition. So, from that introduction, it is very clear that we are looking at the event, we are looking at the critique, and we are looking at the imagery and the repetition and how the two come together. So, in the essay, your teacher would expect that you're going to talk about the imagery, you'll talk about the repetition, you'll talk about the event and how it all comes together to critique it. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Remember, an introduction is there to tell the reader this is what's going to happen. But you can't say, I will speak about, or in this essay. Okay, that's not allowed in academic writing, and definitely not for a poetry and literature essay. I will be doing another video on how to write a poetry essay and a literature essay. So yeah, just keep an eye out for that. So firstly, the poet repeats the child is not dead. Okay, contrast to the title of the poem. Physical death and figuratively what is happening. So the death of this child might have been seen as something common or not an everyday occurrence, but it's definitely not the only child who was murdered. And the government would often censor that, and yet the news of this child got out. Okay, it had repercussions. So again, this would have reflected on the government in a negative way. The second paragraph is the repetition of the child. So just focusing on the fact of the innocence and the vulnerability. So obviously this is quite a harsh, a brutal act, which would have definitely opened the eyes of some people. The other paragraph is talking about the important image of the child raising his fists against his mother and his father. So the child is representing the youth of the country rising up against the oppression. It's got the synesthesia, scream the smell, and it gives the very vivid image of rage and indignation. Okay, it's now tangible almost. Lastly, the poet uses the image of the child's presence to speak out against the country and its policies. Okay, it refers to without a pass, okay, looking through the windows, the shadow of the soldiers at all the meetings. So indirectly, what happened to the child and how the poet speaks about it is just a constant jab or critique of what was going on at the time, and especially the orders, the rules of the government. So the story becomes international. That is why the poet includes the last line, without a pass. So in conclusion, we've now spoken about the imagery, we've looked at the repeated words, what they refer to, how they represent historical moments, and all of that, because the government is spoken about negatively, is a critique on it. All right, so hopefully that is helpful. The second poem we'll be doing is the Amagoduka. So there were 5 questions and an essay question. So outline where the men are coming from and where they are going to, listing the 3 facts. What do you think is the glory of the ancestors? What is the tone? And comment on why the song that they are singing can be seen as doubly sad. So we already know it is sad, but why is it doubly sad? Okay, so let's have a look here. Okay, outline where the men come from and where they are going to. So they're coming from Vryheid and they are on their way to Johannesburg. So stanza 1 talks about Vryheid. They've passed the Blood River, they've passed the coal fields of Dundee, the train comes to a stop at Glencoe Station, and yet at the end of the poem they talk about they are on their way to Igoli, which is Johannesburg. Okay, number 2, 3 facts. Okay, how do we know that they're poor? So they've got dried bread, they're eating corned beef with rusty knives, they are passing a plastic can from mouth to mouth, and those 3 things indicate that they are poor. So why do you think the glory of the ancestors is shattered? So if you consider it, generally people want to please the ancestors by being successful, by keeping true to the culture and the heritage, not selling out, etc. And yet in this poem it's very clear that the men who are supposed to be looking after the women and the children and, being with the villagers, they are now on a train to work in a mine. Where are the mines? In the very lands that they are supposed to protect. So they are almost themselves around the land. So it seems to be a bit of a vicious cycle. So they need to leave in order to work, to look after their people, but the work that they are doing is actually tearing apart the land. Okay, what is the tone? So the tone at the beginning of the poem is, I would say, sorrowful. I wouldn't say nostalgic because it's not really thought of fondly. You could definitely say that the tone is hopeless or resigned. So resigned means you're now accepting your fate and there's nothing you're going to do about it. So what would we use to quote and support? Water flowed languidly. They talk about dispirited, shattered glory, long journey, etc. Okay, comment on why the song that the Amagoduka are singing can be seen as doubly sad. So it's already sad because they've got to leave their families, but it is doubly sad because they're singing about the land that they left and what has happened to it because they've had to leave. So they talk about the hills of Msinga, which has now been stripped. So again, like I said in the beginning, they're leaving the land to get money to look after the people, but the job that they're doing is breaking the land apart. Okay, it talks about the famine and the drought, the cattle, the carcasses, the hollow-cheeked maidens, they far from home. Talks about the children who are malnourished. It then speaks about eating the gold dust and spitting out blood. Okay, so there you can see the answers to the questions. So on the left hand side of the video you can see the answers there that I've spoken about with the ticks, and then we've got the poetry essay. So in the poem Amagoduka there is an underlying comment that the poet is making. So examining the content and the language, the ideas of the people and the land are revealed. So there is something that they want us to do. They want to look at the content and they want to look at the language and then use that to show what has happened or what is underlying what the people are singing and speaking about. So the narrator has traveled a long journey. So stanza 1, line 1, left behind a community. The people he joins in the waiting room are poor, they're eating dried bread, fingernails are broken with hard work, they're going to work on the mines. So here the reader notices that the people are going to their deaths. Okay? So eat the ghost and spit out the blood. This is not a pleasant work trip. They are moved out of necessity. So they are now going to become moles. Okay, they're going to be used and exploited. So indirectly, the reader knows what is happening because of the song that they are singing. and the description of what they've left. The land is also being abused, okay, because it has to speak about the people and the land. So they talk about the coal fields, it refers to it as blackheads, they talk about the dryness, the carcasses, the animals are dying, there is a drought. So the land itself is being exploited. In conclusion, the underlying comment that is being made is the land and its people are being used. The land and its people are suffering for the benefit of others. They are destroying the land they love to make money to feed themselves and their families. At the bottom, you can see the word count, 299, because remember, poetry essay is 250 to 300. So that's well within the means. The next video, I will go over the other poems. Thank you.